So there's this guy on YouTube called Leo who dresses up leftist political ideology in the trappings of psychology. But for all of his illusions pertaining to the supposedly scientific nature of his analysis, his arguments are nothing but pseudo-philosophical. In the particular video of his, to which I have chosen to respond today, he insinuates that conservatives and libertarians are motivated by nothing more than a fear of accepting responsibility. This, of course, is laughable, as we shall see.
Notice how you avoid both personal responsibility and also collective responsibility. In fact, one of the sneaky mechanisms that your mind uses to avoid collective responsibility, and a lot of right-wingers and conservatives and libertarians are guilty of this, as I've talked about in the past, is that they will actually use the mantle of personal responsibility to shirk collective responsibility.
Refusing to accept a so-called responsibility that is not so is not shirking. Rather, it is simply being moral.
So in cases like systemic racism or inequalities and injustices within society, a conservative or libertarian will say, oh, well, they just need to take more personal responsibility. No, you actually need to take more collective responsibility.
Leo. Merely asserting that others possess a collective responsibility does not make it so. Your proclamation that others need to take collective responsibility completely ignores the possibility that they may not share your opinions about what is just or unjust. They may not recognize the validity of your presumption that equality is some sacred idol to which we ought to bow, and they may not even believe that there are any collective responsibilities. Now, I certainly do believe that racism, in all of its forms, is immoral, and that when it is codified in the laws, it constitutes an injustice. I possess this belief precisely because I do not believe that an individual can be justly held to account for the actions of other individuals within some group with which he or she has been associated with. You see, those who advocate for racism utilize the rubric of collective responsibility to justify their racism. Whether it is those who, in the past, punished innocent Japanese Americans for the actions of the Japanese Empire, or whether it is those in the present, who advocate for the deportation of innocent African Americans due to statistics that suggest that blacks, in general, are disproportionately involved in homicides, or whether it is those who seek reparations from innocent European Americans for slavery, an institution that has long been abolished and that they have had no part in whatsoever. Everyone that has ever sought to punish innocents within a racial group has always sought to use the actions of others within that racial group as a justification. Of course, it has always been, and will always be, a cheap one, as one cannot ever be justly held to account for actions in which one took no part. One is only ever individually responsible for their own actions. They are not responsible for actions attributed to a collective with which one is associated. You claim to be an opponent of racism, yet you agree with the racist with regards to the existence of collective responsibilities. This, of course, leads me to ask, why reject racism? I have a clear reason for doing so, as I reject the very notion of collective responsibility. I find that there can be no justifications for racism if we are obligated to treat each individual that we encounter as they deserve in accordance with their merits. If, however, individuals can be held responsible for actions attributed to a collective, then it would seem that your condemnation of racism rings hollow.
Collective responsibility doesn't negate and is not mutually exclusive with personal responsibility. Both are important because we are both individuals and we are also part of a collective. And both of these dynamics are interpenetrating all the time within our lives. None of us are really individuals. We're always interacting with others, whether it's online or in our family or in our intimate relationships or at work, in business. It's all collective type stuff.
Interacting with others does not make us not individuals. Being part of a collective does not eradicate our individuality, and collectives are nothing more than congregations of individuals. If there are no individuals, then there is no collective, as a collective is not some disembodied amorphous entity that can somehow exist without its constituent components. As such, it is utterly illogical to point to our interactions as individuals with other individuals within a collective as some proof that we are not, in fact, really individuals. Since we are, in fact, individuals, we can only ever act individually. There is no way to take collective responsibility, as it is not collectives, but rather individuals that act. As such, any responsibilities that we possess, if responsibility pertains to how we are to act, can only be responsibilities that we individually possess.
Likewise, if you're a conservative and you deny things like systemic racism, you can ask yourself, why am I avoiding collective responsibility here? Why am I just offloading this and trying to excuse it and rationalize it away, saying, oh, those black people or whatever, they're not taking enough personal responsibility? Well, is that really the case? Or maybe I'm not taking enough collective responsibility by trying to blame them for not taking personal. What if they are taking personal responsibility, but the collective situation is so rigged or unjust that actually we need to take more collective responsibility? What if that's the case? That means I'd have to maybe reevaluate my worldview, because see, my worldview blames them for it. So why don't I want to take collective responsibility? What am I trying to avoid there?
When you insinuate that a rejection of the politics of so-called systemic racism is motivated by an avoidance of responsibility, you fail to realize that denial of a particular political golden cow, such as systemic racism, could easily be motivated by a differing perspective of the facts. I contend that there has yet to be a single evidence presented that actually demonstrates the continued existence of systemic racism against blacks in modern American governance. The fact of the matter seems to, in fact, be the reverse. It seems to me that legal efforts as of late have sought to privilege minorities that are favored by the left. This would be true since before I was even born. Affirmative action, racial quotas for hiring and college admissions, exemption from legal requirements such as IDs for civic activities such as voting, as well as many other endeavors, have been undertaken to grant such undue privileges. The fact of the matter is that this so-called responsibility for which you advocate is entirely one-sided and hypocritical. In your eyes, I possess a responsibility to serve the interests of others, without any expectation of reciprocity whatsoever. You absolve certain groups of people of all responsibility for their own lot in life, and offload that responsibility wholesale upon others, in particular, conservatives and libertarians. Why is it our responsibility to handhold others? On what grounds do you reject the personal responsibilities of some, whilst seeking to impute upon others a responsibility in their stead? I doubt that I will ever receive answers to these questions, as no answer has ever been given by those who ascribe to the various cults of unearned rewards, undeserved punishments, and random, causeless obligations that are utterly detached from our own moral agency. Now, in situations in which it is indeed the case that there are those who are being oppressed within our own society, I certainly agree that it would be incumbent upon us to eliminate such injustice, as it is not in one's best interest to tolerate injustices within a society into which one has joined. This being said, I doubt that we would find common ground when it comes to defining oppression. One does his neighbor absolutely no injury whatsoever when he surpasses him in prosperity, and laws that specifically apply only to non-white minorities have long been abolished in this country. You tell us that we ought to reconsider our worldview on no basis other than the simple fact that we disagree with yours. Rather ironic, since you do so in a video on introspection.